All right, let's ask God's blessing on our meeting. Father, we bow and we thank you for the chance again to get together with those of like mind who want to learn from your word, and those that will be listening to this on the forum, and hopefully many others around the world. We ask your blessing on this study, that you would open our hearts and minds to the spiritual things that you have for us, and help us in the teaching so that we do cover material that is pertinent and useful to all of us in our lives. And we thank you now for this opportunity. We ask your blessing on us in Christ's name. Amen. Okay. Well, it's interesting. That verse that says, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there will I be also, So we just have to ask ourselves, are we gathered here in his name? Is that our purpose for being here? Is that why we're here? Is that our sole primary purpose, Well, then he's here. He's here. He's in this room. Not that he isn't in this room if we're not gathered in his name, because he's in this room even if you're here, having a sex orgy, you're getting drunk. He's here, or he's there, or wherever you are, he's there. But he's not there in the sense of being your spiritual guide. You see, that's what we're all about here, to receive something supernatural. That somehow in this study and so on, there's got to be something supernatural that we couldn't get without him. Or we wouldn't even pray. Why pray that he be here? We don't need him. We just use our intellect, and do. Well, I've learned a long time ago that intellect stuff only goes so far, I mean, I use eSword, which is a technical, analytical, electronic device that can just give you all the scriptures, and you can hit the numbers and get Strong's definitions and so on instantly. But that only goes so far. I have people write me all the time, and they say, Ray, what Bible do you use so that I can understand these things like you do? And I mean, I don't mean to be arrogant, but I think to myself, what? You think you understand the scriptures by a better translation? Actually, the translations that are out there are pretty good. All of them. People think, well, you're so down on the King James. Excuse me, that's a King James. Most of the Bibles I have back there are King James, and I have some that are virtually, totally wore out. King James, right? Granted, Aeonius does not mean eternity. That's not accurate. But then again, even Concordant, which is probably the single best translation I know of, along with Rotherham's and Young's and Weymouth and some of those, But they have some crazy things too, In the Concordant, when the disciples got together and broke bread, they masticated together. What? Masticated? What kind of nonsense is that? They ate together. You're supposed to translate from one language to another, not give a word for word. You know what I mean? True, it does mean masticate, but that also, when you translate it, means eating. Anyhow, how did I get off on this? I don't know, but I did. But anyway, I mean, all the translations, it's in there. Listen, the gospel is in there. It's in all of them. Okay? It's in there. The idea of burning in hell forever as opposed to receiving chastisement that will correct you for a certain period of time. I mean, there's a big difference there in that, And we can make those changes. Somebody said recently, for about the third or fourth time now, I think, said, Ray, why don't you come out, since you're such an expert on Hebrew and Greek and you explain these things, so why don't you come out with your own translation? Are you crazy? An expert on Hebrew and Greek? I don't even know English, let alone Hebrew and Greek. I mean, I just stumble through. People say, well, you think, no, I don't. You lie. I do not think I'm some great one, that I'm some great intellect, that I'm a scholar, or some great peer of academia. Or something. No. I've never said that. All I've ever said is I'm a teacher. Good, bad, or indifferent, I'm a teacher. That's what I am. That's the only claim I make. I'm a teacher. I teach. You say, well, you don't teach very well. Well, that's fine. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. It's a free country. But anyway, just a few words, few phrases that are wrong. All the Bibles have, I don't care what Bible you have. If you read the whole thing, would you be of the opinion that we should obey God or not obey God? What do you think would be the overall feeling you would get from the Scriptures if you read any Bible there is? I think it'd be self-evident, we have to obey God. Right? And you ought to conduct yourself with a certain morality. You shouldn't fornicate with your neighbor's wife. You shouldn't steal. You shouldn't, bear false witness against people in a court of law. And you shouldn't do those things. I don't care how stupid a church or doctrine, there might be. You can't screw those things up. Those things are in there from Genesis to Revelation. And so then you get down to, why is all the hocus pocus? Carnal mind that deceive people. All right, today we're going to talk about the shortest subject in the whole Bible. The shortest subject in the Bible. Church government. Okay. Church government. It's interesting. Every one of us in this room came out of the Worldwide Church of God. And that's, and if Gordon were here, he's sick today. If Gordon were here, he'd be another one. Harry, our contribution man here, out of the Worldwide. Kathy, our one and only female moderator on the forum, out of the Worldwide. My luncheon buddy over here, Bob, go out for lunch twice a week. Worldwide. Dennis, our webmaster, came out of the Worldwide. Dennis is from Michigan. Bob is from Mobile. You were born in Florida, right? Where? Nebraska, excuse me. Gordon from Florida, and Kathy from Mississippi, and me from Pennsylvania. Now, what are the chances we would all come out of the Worldwide Church of God be sitting in this room today? It's a little ironical, don't you think?
Did a little bit of good in his life.
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far, but let's say some good came out of some of the evil that he did. Well, no, something good is good, actually. People think, well, you're angry. You sound like you were hurt. And say, no, I'm not. And there's nothing in my writings to suggest that. There really isn't. I had somebody sent me a really nice email this week and said, wow, you've blown me away. I've never heard anybody teach like this, They said, but you are so so cocky. And he said, well, I guess maybe that's part of it. That's what keeps them coming back or something like that. Now, I'll write her, it was a woman, and I'll say, could you give me an example of that? See? Yeah. And they won't be able to. It's just a feeling they get. They can't make a statement. I've asked that many times. Would you give me an example of this anger toward people? Or give me an example. And they can't. They can't. It's not in there. They think it is. It's not. Then, of course, many times what I'll do, they say, you should be more understanding and more loving. And I say, oh, you mean like this? And then I give them Matthew 23, where Christ said, you fools, you blind guys, you hypocrites, you whitened septic tanks, you generation of snakes. I said, I've never called anybody, these ministers of the world, I've never called them snakes or whitened sepulchres, never. But you want me to be more like that? And then they just get frustrated or angry or whatever. The thing is, here's what I do that they don't like. I speak with authority about God's Word. If the Bible says it, I speak it with authority. They don't like it. That's what they don't like. If I apologize and say, well, maybe it could be this way, and have you ever considered, that, Christ might have said this or that, and just very, pussyfooted, shallow, weak, wimpy, that's okay. Don't speak with authority. And what was the biggest thing that they had against Christ immediately when the Pharisees and the religious leaders came out to listen? What was the one thing they immediately, they just sent their hair up on end? He spoke not like the other Pharisees and so on, but with authority. He spoke with authority. Yet Christ was humble. He said, of my own self I can do nothing. I can say that. Of my own self I can do nothing. But that doesn't mean you can't speak with authority about something that you know is right. But then people say, well, you get a little pushy there. Well, so be it. If it's true, it's true. All right, church government, the shortest subject in the Bible. You'll see why I say that in a minute. Do you obey those that have the rule over you? Then he sent me an article from the Wall Street Journal. I guess that he got off the forum, and the subject was the backlash against tithing. And I just took one little excerpt here. There was this one guy, when he objected to his church's instruction to tithe, Kirk Caesarita took it up with the church leaders. And, explained that, he didn't think that was scriptural. So anyway, they sent back a letter to him. And the pastor in the letter closed with this verse from Hebrews 13:17. Obey your leaders and submit to them. Okay? For they keep watch over your souls as those who will give an account, and so on. But the part I wanted to bring out, obey. See, this is what the minister was telling. You know what the scriptures say, don't you, Kurt Cesarito? The scriptures say, obey your leaders and submit to them. Meaning he, as a pastor or a teacher of the gospel, he had authority over him, and they needed to obey and submit to that authority. In Hebrews 13:7 it says, remember them that have the rule over you. And in Hebrews 13:24, salute all them that have the rule over you, and all the saints. They of Italy salute you. So, let me see a show of hands. How many of you obey those that have the rule over you? Can I see his hands?
That works, though.
Okay, you obey those who have the rule over you. Okay, that was kind of a trick question, so I won't say how many hands went up or didn't go up. Because that is not what the scriptures say. That's what the King James says. And it's not totally wrong, but it is somewhat wrong. And you get a wrong feeling. And I don't know what translation this man was quoting from. Obey your leaders and submit to them. But we do find 3 times in the 13th chapter of Hebrew this phrase, remember, obey, and whatever, them that have the rule over you. Now later on I'm going to show you a better translation of those scriptures. All major churches and religions have a rule. They have a government. They have a hierarchy, you see. And I put down here the Catholic Church, for example. They have elders and bishops, deacons and lower level, the Knights of Columbus, and so on, which are not really, ordained priests per se. And then they have the priests, bishops, archbishops, cardinal, and a pope. Okay, that's the hierarchy. And those people have real authority in the Catholic Church. Now, on the negative side, recently, I think it was in the range of $65 million. The church paid out as kind of hush money or damages to those people in the Boston area who were molested by this hierarchy, say, priests and so on. Well, by what authority can they take people's money, poor people's, widows' mites and whatever, $65 million worth of those mites, and pay it to people that have been sexually molested by the priests? By what authority can they do that? Well, by the authority of the church. You owe the church money. They take your money. They do with it what they will. And if it requires blackmail money, they'll play back blackmail money. That's real authority, you see. You know, back in the Roaring 20s or whatever, I guess that was the period where Al Capone and, you know, Pretty Boy Floyd and all these people were operating. You know, they would require the merchants in the cities, Chicago, New York, and so on, to pay them protection money. Okay? If you were a merchant, you didn't pay them protection money, and they would protect you too. It isn't that you just stole your money. You paid them money, they protect you. I mean, they would look out for you that, you know, hoodlums or whatever didn't rob your store or whatever. There was a certain amount that they would do. But, you know, by what authority could they make you pay the money? Or not only wouldn't they protect you, they themselves might burn down your business. You see, that's real authority. That's fear. Those people didn't want to give that money. They feared the consequences. And we can see immediately that that's evil, can't we? Can't we see that that's criminal? Isn't this exactly what the governments of churches and religions do? Of course it is. It's all based on fear. The doctrines are based on fear. And the giving of the money is based on fear, because if you don't, then they'll get you with the doctrines, you see. If you don't pay your tithes, you're robbing from God and you'll go to hell. I mean, that's as simple as it is. And people say, no, we shouldn't come to Christ or be Christians out of fear. Listen, I can't tell you how many leaders that sit there up on that ivory gold-gilded stage of TBN have personally given testimonies that the first and major reason they accepted Christ or became a Christian was fear of going to hell. I heard it with my own ears numerous times. Now, all major churches, denominations, have a church government, and they usually have a national, regional, national, and or international headquarters. Does that word ring a bell? Headquarters. And the work. Headquarters. They have a headquarters, and from that headquarters is issued the government of that denomination. And they have the power to hire and fire, to disfellowship you, to embarrass you in the multitude of the congregation, and or, assign you to hell. They exercise, or at least they think they have that power. And the independents, who don't have a worldwide church of congregations, but just have their own personal ministry, they're worse yet. When you take people like Paul Crouch. I mean, there's not a Paul Crouch church, I don't think, where you go and listen to Paul Crouch preach every Sunday. I don't know. Benny Hinn has a church, I think, but I don't think he pastors it, though. He has others. Then you have some who do pastor a church, like John Hagee and Joel Osteen and some of those. And then you have others, again, Creflo Dollar, he's got a congregation. And others, like Joyce Myers, I don't know if she has a congregation she pastors every Sunday or not. But most of those, their big thing is television, their television ministry, and where they go and rent these convention centers. Swaggart is back. Jim Bakker is back. Now, how do they show their authority? We talk about authority and government, hierarchy, all of these things, power, rulership, obey those that have the rule over you. The one thing that these people want is your money. Okay? They want your money. You listen to Creflo Dollar and Joyce Myers and Paula White and all. They want your money. All want you to be prayer partners and to just call them warriors and partners and all of that in their work. They want your money. Now, anybody who can control your money is exercising great authority over you. Okay? Anybody who can claim your money. Now, here's the thing. They don't say, give me your money. I mean, they're not that stupid. People would see through that. They say, give God your money, and here's where to send it. Huh? Can you see that? If you're watching Paula White and you want to obey all this, and it's every program, I mean, it's nonstop. That girl got dollar signs just flipping in her eyes. That woman is obsessed with worldlyism, materialism, money, clothes, jewelry, home, jets, power. The woman is absolutely possessed of it. So she teaches all these every morning, every day, all these rules and regulations and building the foundation and the last year it was 07, the year of completion. This year God is going to complete His blessings on you. Well, what do you do in 08 then? 08 is the number of resurrection. This is the year you're going to be resurrected into the new. And 9 is when some other thing. And it's like used car salesmen and car salesmen. Any car salesman, new or used, worth their salt on the face of the earth, can give you a reason why this day, today, not tomorrow, today is the best time to buy a car at their dealership. Here's a reason why. If they don't have reasons, they make them up. They make them up. We have too many cars, we got to reduce them to get rid of the inventory. It's a July sale. It's a this sale. It's a manager's sale. It's some kind of a sale. There's always a reason why today. And so these ministers will never run out of ammunition. Not only can they tell you why 08 is the year that you're supposed to do all this, but they can tell you on Tuesday why Tuesday is the day of the month of the year that you're supposed to do this. All nonsense. Just unbelievable nonsense. But they quote scriptures from the Bible and stuff. And lo and behold, people, two things. Either greed sets in or fear. And sometimes they use both. Fear and greed. People are told if they don't tithe, they're robbing God. And if you rob God, you're a thief. And if you're a thief, you'll go to hell. But they're also told if you do tithe, He'll open up the windows of heaven and pour you out all these material blessings. Cars, money, diamonds, furs, whatever, So greed and fear. And they all use it. And they use it well. Those that use it the best, they make the most. But the one that gets me is, you give it to God. Show God. Give it to God. How do you do that? You give it to me. They put themselves in the place of God. When you give to Paula White, you're given to God. What does that tell you? Come on, people, wake up. Paula White, Joyce Myers, Creflo are not God. couldn't get me to give them $1, I'll tell you that. And look at him. Paul Crouch. $1 million everything. I mean, everything they have is in the $1 million range. He's got a horse ranch, a bunch of bought that $5 million mansion, and they own real estate all over the place. I mean, they are, I think they were offered $13 billion for TBN network. $13 billion. That's a real goal. Now there's a goose that lays the golden egg. Benny Hinn takes in nearly $100 million a year. Spends $2,000 a night for a hotel. What kind of an apostle of God or evangelist or pastor does that? $2,000. Do you know how nice a room you can get for $275? You get the nicest rooms in the best hotels. Now, granted, you go to some of your, more luxurious places, you'll pay $500 a night. But $2,000? These people have materialistic appetites. It's just beyond belief. Creflo Dollar. I saw a picture of his house from the air. It looks like a small city. Some of the angled roofs and, no, that's one house. He brags about his Rolls Royce or Bentley or whatever he drives. Paula White has a $700,000 mansion in Texas. She has a condo in Trump Tower. I don't think anything in that tower sells for less than $2 or $3 million. And a $2.5 million in Tampa mansion, and then more property in Malibu, and a private jet, and on and on and on and on. And she's a newcomer on the block. She's only been around for half a dozen years or less. Dr. Sharona, he's on TBN a lot. He wears 365 new pairs of shoes every year. How could somebody who wears 365 a new pair of shoes every day, how could somebody like that be a spiritual leader? What in the world does he have to offer spiritually to anybody? Somebody who is that far off their rocker that they need a new pair of shoes every day. When there's millions of people don't own one pair of shoes any day. In Benny Hinn in these $2,000 a night rooms. I heard him say with my own ears that people who are not sending money into TBN to spread the gospel, there are people who will go to hell because you're not sending money to TBN. He spends $2,000 a night for a hotel room. Wake up, people. Fred Price likes to brag about his Rolls Royce. Kenneth Copeland says he and Creflo Dollar are going to be the first Christian billionaires. Did you all see those jets? I sent you the pictures of the jets. Yep. The last one on the list, Kenneth Copeland, he's got a more expensive jet than Paul Crouch. Paul Crouch's jet cost $16 million and some. Kenneth Copeland, $20 million. And he's got another one for his wife. They both have a $20 million jet. And they claim to represent Jesus Christ and the gospel to poor people around the world. Are you crazy? How do they get that money? Authority. They make people think that they're sitting in the seat of authority. God's government. And we're going to see what the Bible has say about God's government in the church. Because I said it's the shortest subject in the Bible. All right, let's move on now to the infamous Mr. Armstrong, the dictator of all religious dictators. And, I can talk about him because I knew him. Not only did I eat dinner at his table, but he laid hands on me. God forbid, but it happened. Okay. So anyway, this man uses more fear than reward. Some of them talk about reward, getting blessing, but Herbert is more fear. He was more fear. And he would write these semi-annual letters and co-worker letters, and it was always, year after year, decade after decade, every letter, this is the most urgent. This is the very most urgent appeal I have ever had to make to you. Every letter. And just all caps, underline, exclamation points. If you don't send in your money, this work will not get done. God will hold you responsible that this message, every letter. And they were long letters. Legal paper, 5 and 6 pages each. Sometimes more. It was interesting. One time, my regional director, Paul Flatt, was down. And they knew that, I knew what was going on. And so anyway, they're trying to get me straightened out and so on. I said, Paul, let me read you something. So I read something about, brethren, this is the most urgent time in our lives. At this point in the work, we are starting to struggle. We really need, and on and on and on. You got to send your money now. This work will go under. This is the most urgent time. And I just read a little bit. I said, do you know when he sent that letter? This was so funny. Mr. Flatt said, that was the coworker letter before this last one, wasn't it? I said, no, Paul, that was in 1934. And then I showed it to him. He thought, where the heck did you get a hold of that? By the way, it also happened to be the year 33 or 30, I believe 1934, when he wrote a letter to his then Seventh-day Church of God or whatever he was starting to get going. He wrote a letter about church government. And guess what? He put down every principle that he stands for, that he stood for in later years. Everything. He had it nailed. He went through the scriptures and he had it nailed. Turned his back on all of those scriptures. And when somebody brought it to his attention, back in about the 70s, I believe, said, you wrote this, you wrote this in the Good News or whatever, on church government. And here's what you said. It's the total opposite of how... And you know what he said to that? He said, well, a lot of people accuse me I never change. But then when I do, they accuse me too. That was his answer to that. I could tell you stories, I'm telling you. Anyway, but this man also, he just obsessed with power, prestige, materialism, pleasures. He owned, well, he's dead now, of course, but he owned a mansion like catty corner across the street of Orange Grove Boulevard from the Wrigley's Chewing Gum Mansion, which took up 1 square block, by the way. 1 house, 1 block. Herbert Armstrong's house is really the only one on that block, too. But then to the east a little further, there's the Italian Sunken Garden. So it isn't that his house takes the whole block, but it's a big house worth probably, I don't know, $5 to $10 million today. But then he had another lavish home in Big Sandy, and another one in Phoenix, and another one in Bricket Wood. And of course, he would go to those places, via jet. Many people don't know Walt Disney, I forget when he died, but anyway, Walt Disney's pilot was Captain Black, and he was Mr. Armstrong's pilot. When Disney was gone, he went to work for Mr. Armstrong as the captain. And of course, he had the best jet, the Gulfstream II, But then they also had, the King Air and the French Falcon, and, they had their own little Air Force. Herbert Armstrong had his own private cook, maid, chauffeurs, limos. He claimed $300,000 salary. But like I've said so often, screw up the heck with the salary. Just give me the expense account. I don't want a salary. Just give me my own expense account. But $300,000, that was pretty hefty back then, But he always carried with him, wherever he went, $10,000 in cash. This was like for tips and stuff. Listen, there are stories, people went with him to, some fine restaurant in Los Angeles. He would tip so large that even the waiters, it would be totally embarrassed. I mean, it's just obscene how much he would tip. Just totally obscene, But it would just show his arrogance, that's all. When he took a lot of his trips, he also had, I don't know exactly how this, it was set up like it was set up as a special account so that, I don't know, nobody would know where the money went except, he and his financial advisor or whatever. But he would have $100,000. Like he'd go to England, he'd have, the $10,000 cash, which was like tip money. And then he had this $100,000 in case you wanted to buy stuff. And of course it's reported that on occasion he would have to send back to re-up it another $100,000 and sometimes $300,000 on one trip. He needed an extra $300,000. And where did he get this money? From those co-worker letters saying, brethren, this gospel's got to go out. Just crazy. He would buy vast treasures, art, silver, gold, whatever. It's also known now that Herbert Armstrong had a secret millions of dollars bank account in Switzerland. He had money tucked away for a rainy day. I can't get too overboard here because my wife's a little younger than me, but when Armstrong was 84, he married a girl in her 30s. That's a little bit of a stretch. However, maybe this one even tops it. Dr. Lochner, I don't know where he was in some educational thing, got his doctorate. I don't know how he came to Ambassador College, but a lot of people think this was really a stupid, how could anybody believe this stupid college and stuff? Listen, you didn't go, you haven't seen it. You didn't see it like we saw it, I mean, we had, important people come there. Presidents, premiers, kings, King Leopold and movie stars from Hollywood. And I once took on a tour of Ambassador College the head of the World Court, Franz Joseph Strauss. Important people coming out of college. This is not, you say, well, yeah, in retrospect now, and we learned everything behind this. We didn't see all that at the time. But Dr. Lochner, he was the head of Imperial Schools. There was Ambassador College, and then for all the workers and stuff, you understand, there were 3,000 workers out there in Pasadena. They had Imperial Schools, elementary, high school, and so on, a full school system. Dr. Lochner was head of that. And by the way, one of the people in my freshman class was Dr. Farrow from Oregon. Dr. Farrow was over the entire Oregon school system. And he was a freshman with me at Ambassador College. It's amazing stuff. You can't believe some of the stuff. Robert Kuhn had to work. They made you do this. It was like a humbling thing. You had to at least one semester or something. Even if you had the money to pay your tuition, you had to work. He worked with me in the bindery. And he had a PhD in brain neurology. Can you believe that? I remember Dr. Hay came through the printing plant one day, and Dr. Kuhn and I were working on the line feeding, the stuff in for the bins for the Plain Truth being stitched together and so on. And Dr. Hay came over. I forget who this dignitary was, some important person. And he said something like, he said, here at Ambassador College, we've learned that for people to be successful, sometimes they have to start at the bottom and show their true character and so on. He said, therefore, whoever, whatever, so-and-so, I would like you to meet Dr. Kuhn. Stuffing magazines in a collating line. I mean, it's just, stuff is so bizarre sometimes. It's just, I mean, who with doctor's degrees would come and be a freshman? Well, they had to take certain basic courses if they were going to be used in the work, and then started out in the freshman level. But anyway, so Dr. Lochner, he became, after a while, somebody else I think took over the school system there at Imperial Schools after his wife died, and then he started to travel. He was like, the companion to Herbert Armstrong, kind of his aide, and I don't know what you'd call him. And he traveled with him all around the world. And so Dr. Lochner realized, that Herbert was around some certain hanky-panky and so on. So, and Herbert liked to drink, so Dr. Lochner would just get him drinking, and get him drunk. And then, their mouth loosens up sometimes, their tongue. And he would he'd secretly record all this stuff, and they'd be talking about who knows what, all kinds of things about sex and what Herbert did and stuff. He recorded all that, in case he needed it in the future, which he did. And he used that for blackmail. So even after Herbert fired him, he still collected, $50,000 or $100,000 a year for life. Mm-hmm. For life. Oh, let me tell you this. So Dr. Lochner, after his wife died, he was 64 at the time then, or sometime thereafter. I know he was 64 years old, and he decided to get married. Okay, and he did. He got married to a 19-year-old. 19-year-old. Now, that's a little bizarre. Anybody who knew Mr. Armstrong personally behind the scenes will attest that he was an arrogant, egotistical megalomaniac. Although, in public, he carried himself as a very sophisticated, when he walked in a room, there was a certain hush came over. He was a man of authority. Yeah, but I mean, even he wore $5,000 suits or whatever. Everything was handmade, the finest material on earth and so on. And, so he had a certain, when you wear everything, when your eyeglasses cost $3,000 or whatever, you can see that. People can just see that, Don't you notice when they show movie stars on TV, they don't have sunglasses off the Ray-Ban rack or whatever at the dollar store, You can say, that's expensive stuff. You can just see it, And, but so he, in public, he was sort of, he was a dignified man, for sure. But behind the scenes, people knew what he was. And although he bragged a little bit in public, not so much. More than needful, for sure, but not enough that people, thought of him as being just an arrogant egotist, But it's interesting, Bobby Fischer, you all remember Bobby Fischer, he was a world champion chess player. And there for years he disappeared. And remember how everybody was saying, where is Bobby Fischer? Where is Bobby Fischer? Nobody in the world knew, for years and years, nobody in the world knew where Bobby Fischer was. I knew where he was. He was living with Art McCarroll. You know Art McCarroll, don't you, Denny? He was living with Art McCarroll. But anyway, one day, And Bobby Fischer tells about this in the Ambassador Review. It was put out by John Trecheck. John Trecheck and I shared a room together, a dormitory room at Ambassador College. He later wrote Ambassador Review and Ambassador Report. But anyway, Bobby Fischer tells John Trecheck that one day Herbert, wanted to show him around the college, and and Bobby says, every place they went, Mr. Armstrong said, you see all this? I built this. And he'd say, yes, Mr. Armstrong, you really did good. And you see this? This is the finest auditorium, and so on. And, he said, boy, you really did good, Mr. Armstrong. And you see all this? I had this all landscape. This is the best landscaping, Ambassador College won the most beautiful college campus in the world 3 years in a row. There was nothing on the earth that could compare with it. So then they made a rule: you can only win 3 years in a row. You can't keep winning. He said, I get the best lane. Yes, Mr. Armstrong, you really did quite a job. Yes, Yes, I can see, Mr. Armstrong. You really an amazing man. And so Bobby Fischer just pumping up his ego because he saw that that's what he wanted. But it just makes an interesting story. Man was all ego. Now, this is about church government, and I'm telling you, the Worldwide Church of God had church government. Boy, I'm telling you, you learned about church government in the Worldwide Church of God. It was so strong and so powerful. You talk about Jim Jones and some of that. They went a little off the deeper end, maybe even than Mr. Armstrong. Jim Jones and David Koresh and so on. What? And those they ended up killing all their followers. But you talk about government. It was drilled in everybody's head. It's government from the head down. And Herbert Armstrong is God's apostle. Then they're the evangelists. And then the pastor, and then the elders, and all this down to the deacons and whatnot. And this chain of command was always to be followed and obeyed, and so on and so forth. So. Along with this great authority, but here's what I want to show. Although Herbert Armstrong, ruled by fear and power and authority and government, you see, he himself was subject to nothing. Even the doctrines that he taught, he didn't obey. Do you really think that Jan and Paul Crouch and Benny Hinn and all these obey the moral laws that they teach? I'm not saying they don't. Did I say they don't? I say, do you really believe they do? Now, you can ask me in private later what I think. Because I know a little bit about most of those people too. Got an email about 6 months ago from a man who worked with Paul Crouch for, how many years was that, Denny? Long time. 12 years or something. He knew a little bit what was going on in that organization. Okay, so anyway, there were a lot of rules and regulations that were even different and stronger than most churches. And they're Bible-based, for sure. Israel was not to eat of clean and unclean, of unclean foods, So the Church of God taught that, Pork products and things like that are not to be eaten and so on. Now, it may be that those are inferior foods compared to beef and lamb and so on and so forth. But in the New Testament we learn that the kingdom of God is not meat and drink, And you don't have to have a conscience about what you eat or don't eat and so on. So, but that was taught very strictly then, you see, in the church. Yet Herbert Armstrong, he ate pork anytime he wanted to. I didn't know it then, but I found out since. If he went someplace they were serving pork, he ate pork. He had no qualms about that. Yet, we were intimidated by these laws. Divorce. Well, I'm telling you, there is one of the most evil teachings in the whole Worldwide Church of God. Thank God I had nothing to do with any one of them. Came close one time, I spoke out against it, and I was an associate under Jack Pyle, And he was leaning one way on it, because before you would baptize somebody in the Worldwide Church of God, you had to find out whether they were living in adultery or anything. So if you married somebody that had been divorced or whatever, then you'd go back and, why were you divorced? And, did they forsake you, or you just didn't get along? And if it was that there was no adultery involved, well, you're legally married. They would split up. You couldn't get baptized unless you broke up the family, And there was one, this guy was a big camera dealer. So he had a big camera store like Calagas or something up in Memphis, and he married this girl that was in the church, and it was his second marriage, I believe, and they now had some children, and Jack was thinking, according to our rules, they're living in adultery. They would have to break up, And I said, no, and I don't know what I came up with, but I know I said, no. And I finally persuaded him, and he said, okay. He said, and they always had to write up a report, send it to headquarters, how we counsel. Unbelievable. Anyway, but we did not break up that family. That's the only time I was actually involved in one of those sessions, and I thank God that I was not involved in breaking them, because they broke up families by the hundreds. Yep. There was a woman right here in Mobile. I shouldn't say who the pastor was, but before I came to Mobile. And this woman, it was determined that her husband and her were not legally married, because he was married before and there was not adultery involved or whatever. And they were married for like 30 years, and they had children. They said, well, they were getting older. She said, well, you sleep in separate bedrooms. No, you must leave him. Later on, he got cancer, and she wanted to visit him. They said no. Then he was on his deathbed, and she begged the minister to just visit him. He said, no, that wouldn't be proper. So she let him die by himself to obey the church. Huh? Boy, I'm telling you, evil beyond words. Evil beyond words. So, we had these strict regulations. Yet, when Herbert, at 84, wanted to marry this girl in his 30s who was a divorcee, no problem. No problem. John Hagee, he preaches against adultery and divorce and all. But when he fell in lust and he was committing fornication with some young girl, Ramon, what was her name? I don't know, Castro is her last name. He divorced his wife. No problem. We used to have to fast on the Day of Atonement. It didn't matter if you had heart problems and you needed to swallow a pill. It didn't matter if you were had low blood sugar or diabetic or whatever. You had to fast. No water, no food. Herbert didn't fast on the Day of Atonement. I learned that from Gardner Ted. He had this house when he married Ramona. He moved. He got this new house in Phoenix. I don't know why that was, but anyway. And Ted was over there once on the Day of Atonement. And his father is eating these nuts and drinking a beer or whatever. And he says, Dad, today is Atonement. And he says, yeah, I know. He said, I'm not going to sit down to a meal or anything. And Ted made the remark. He said, you see, to my father, fasting is when you don't sit down to 3 full-course meals a day. It's just when you snack all day long. Anyway. But unless you think Ted was any better, in some ways he was a little better maybe, but, we had to pay 3 tithes in the worldwide. First tithe, second tithe, third tithe, not to mention Holy Day offerings, building fund, love offerings, poor offerings, whatever, college loans, and, we had to do this. And, yet, Herbert didn't tithe. Herbert would say, well, he would say, we need this money. I need people. I need you to make loans, Then if people make a loan, when it's time to pay it back, then we'd send them a letter and say, we want you to make it a donation. Turn it into a full donation, right? Herbert would make, he said, I wrote a check today. I wrote a check today for $10,000 out of my personal account, setting the example. Now, what he didn't tell you, that was the next day. Are you ready for this? I know this. I'm telling you, this is not rumors I'm talking about. These are facts. The next day, he canceled payment on the check. So, I'm telling you, those that rule by authority and fear, and they have this authority from God, they have nothing. We weren't supposed to use doctors. We were supposed to rely on God to be healed. And of course, all of these people on TV, they're all, you don't need doctors, Benny Hinn, Rod Parsley, all these guys, Hagen, Yet, when they get sick, where do they go? To the doctor, to the hospitals. Herbert took drugs, got inoculated, had nurses and doctors on call, his own nurses and doctors who were on call anytime he needed them. And he needed an operation, they go to have an operation. All the while teaching the church that if you did that, you didn't have faith. I've seen a few healings, Gosh, what is it? It's a deacon up near 8 Mile. I think her name is Marie, and what's his name? Fred. I forget. Anyway, but his wife had breast cancer, and so we went up, and she wanted me to pray for her, and I prayed for her, and she wanted to show me her breasts. And I did not want to see them. But she insisted on showing us her breasts. And her husband sitting there. This was nothing sexual. Her breasts looked like you took 2 or 3 pounds of hamburger in each hand and slapped it to your chest. I'm talking about raw, bloody hamburger, no skin. He then, like the next day or whenever, took her to the hospital. And I can't remember if she'd been to the hospital and came home, and it was like they couldn't do anything. She went back to the hospital. They told him, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name, but they told him that she would die that night. Said not only is she eaten, she's cancer throughout. The woman is gone. He said, you just make preparations. She'll die tonight. She didn't die. We're praying for her. She didn't die. The next day, after a week or so, they sent her home. And her husband started a little garden in the back, maybe as big as our living room here. All these herbs and all this stuff, and he put her on the little strychnine poison diet. And I think apricot pits have a certain amount of strychnine in them or something. And so he was feeding her all these very nutritious, high potent things, and we continued to pray for her. And I'm done. She got skin back on her body again. And she basically recovered for years. And she was just gone. She was just gone. So I've seen, some miraculous things like that. But, Jesus Christ himself said, he that is sick has need of a physician. And you would say, oh yeah, well he was talking spiritually. Christ never said things that were physically wrong, but were spiritually right in that setting. You see what I'm saying? Even even the parables, they were either based on some story or something that people knew, like Lazarus and the rich man, or they were based on things that could factually happen. You pull in a fish, a drag net, it would have good fish and bad fish, and you'd separate them. You would have, you plant seed, and some falls into rocky places, into good soil, and that's what actually happens when you plant over large areas. Some lands in bad areas and doesn't grow. So he doesn't use things that are total lies to represent a spiritual truth. So when he says those that are, sick have need of a physician, not those that are whole. But, so the church, basically followed that rule, and a lot of people died where they wouldn't have needed to. A lot of people died. And yet the leaders, and Herbert himself, although with his own wife now, she had a stopped up intestines or whatever, and they could have taken her to the hospital. The hospital said they could have, cleaned that out. She had a blockage, and she chose not to go, and so she died.
Who was that?
Herbert Armstrong's first wife, Loma.
First wife.
Now I'm going to read you this. I almost hated to put this in here, but for the benefit of those in the worldwide, and there's still splinter groups, and there's still tooting the virtues of Herbert Armstrong, and let me just tell you, there aren't many virtues to toot. So I'm going to put this in. I've known about this for many, many, many years, and I've told almost no one. But since this appears in a book entitled The Daughter of Babylon, written by I forget his name, Bruce Henahan or something like that. Henehan. Henahan. Bruce Henahan. And it's probably it's the best documented book on the Armstrong cult that I've ever seen. There's lots of them out there, and a lot of them are just, they're kind of junky. This one is really professionally and thoroughly documented. So, sex, of course, was something really taboo. Nobody, some of us, who were engaged, we would probably, I guess, fool around a little bit. At least we would kiss. But, it was taboo. And you could get kicked out of college for it, if you got caught necking or something like that. Yet, okay, I want to read you this. This is from the book, Daughter of Babylon. Ted had been deeply hurt upon discovering that what his father had done to his sister. Later, Ted confided in fellow minister David Robinson, he was one of the leading men out there, and a good author, who authored the book Herbert Armstrong's Tangled Web. After hearing of the incest from Ted, in other words, Herbert Armstrong was fornicating with his own daughter for 10 years. After hearing of the incest from Ted, Robinson confronted Herbert at the Tucson home about the issue, in the presence of Henry Cornwall, who was one of their leading attorneys, but the main one was the next one here, Stanley Rader and David Robinson. Armstrong admitted openly that he had committed the incest during 10 years, the earlier years when he was founding the radio church. Although he was not ashamed to confess this before these three men, he did not want his wife Ramona, this is his new young wife, to know about his dark secret. However, now that I don't have any documentation on this, but apparently his wife Ramona did know it was going on. He didn't want Ramona to know about his dark secret. Robinson told me later that Herbert had strictly ordered his staff to prevent his wife from getting a copy of the book and learning of the incest. But in spite of his attempts, Ramona Armstrong was passed a copy by her sister and had already read it before Armstrong had received his own copy. So when Ted, said to Herbert one time, he said, "I can bring you down, Dad." That's what he was talking about. That's when Herbert disfellowshipped Ted. He said, "I can bring you down," because he knew about that. Of course, Ted conceded to a number of ministers at one time. They all knew he was fornicating all the time, he just couldn't keep his hands off a pretty girl. And he was pretty debonair, good-looking guy, talented, really charismatic man. He'd get just about anybody he wanted. And he told a group of ministers once, they asked him about it, and they were talking about it, and I guess he was halfway showing remorse and halfway bragging at the same time. But he said conservatively, up until that time, since he was married, he conservatively had at least 200 women. These were the leaders of the Worldwide Church of God. The heads of the world tomorrow, and all this stuff. And it's just incredible stuff. But then again, you don't know everything else that goes on behind the scenes with all these other people that people think are so great and so on. I'm learning little by little, man works with Paul Crouch for 12 years. He doesn't know a little bit what's going on, I don't know exactly why I put this in here, but there was a coworker letter once, and I quote what Mr. Armstrong said, because this blew me away at the time. He said, regarding the fact that they needed more money and more money and more money, and of course they're just squandering money like it was water, on trips and art treasures and so on and so forth, And all these people had huge, Asamo Goto. He was his connection man to Japan in those places where he got to meet with the Emperor of Japan. And he said, well, it was all done. They didn't want to see him because he was some man of God. He kind of bought his way in, and he would always give them a $25,000 or $50,000 piece of Steuben crystal, you see. And then they usually knew or were told that he would write a glowing article about their leadership of their country in the Plain Truth magazine, which went out to 15 million people in 6 or 8 languages. Oh yeah, well we'll give him a 10-minute audience for that, you see. And now I'm finding out that this Asamo Goto, had connections with I don't know if they call it the Oriental mob or the Japanese mob or whatever. Incredible. And the man, he just had inexhaustible expense account. He had carte blanche. He'd just go overseas and he'd just buy anything he wanted, But anyway, he said in this coworker letter, he said, we need the money. So, you people, you need to respond. This is so urgent. He made this statement. Some of you people are actually spending money on yourselves. I thought, what? I remember reading that and just, seeing red. So you're actually spending money on yourselves. And this man has got an appetite, just like Creflo Dollar and Paula White and Myers and Hagee and all these people. They make Hugh Hefner look like a pauper in some ways. And I'm talking sexually and materialistically. Paula White is what?
I just want to say that I knew people up in Michigan who were doing their third tithe and were suffering greatly to send that third tithe.
Yes.
And it caused great strain on their marriage, and the kids suffered.
Absolutely.
And they used that money, they just threw it away. But they got the money from really suffering of other people. And
you know what's so ironic about that, Dennis? The third tithe was for people like that. It was for the poor. We even called it the widow's fund or the poor fund. And I put people on that fund, and it was tough to get $1 out of them, but, if you made a sob enough story for somebody, they said, all right, so they put them on that fund. It wasn't their money. That's what's so so damnable about all this. These people, they send you money to spread the gospel or to give to the poor and everything, and they spend it on themselves. Do you think people send Paul Crouch money so he can buy a $5 million mansion and a $15 or $20 million jet and just, buy $200-300 bottles of wine? You think that's what's in their heart when they send that money? The same thing with the worldwide. You talk about third tithe. I think I'm the only person that ever caught this. I got it in one of my little notebooks. You sit in the auditorium there, all the headquarters people, couple thousand, and we listen to Herbert and so on the Sabbath day and Gardner Ted. And Gardner Ted made this, with the first tithe, second tithe, third tithe, building holy day fund, special offerings. And Gardner Ted made the statement once. He said, "There's no surer way." I got this in a little notebook. Quotations. There is no surer way to lose your salvation and end up in the lake of fire than to, what do you think? Not pay your first tithe? No. Not pay your second tithe? No. Not paying your tithe of the tithe? No. Not neglecting. That's the word he used. Neglecting. Neglecting your third tithe. Neglecting your third. No surer way. No surer way, he said.
Well, that ensures the first two tithes, for sure.
For sure. If you're neglecting the third, you're already paying the first and the second. You're up to 20%. Now you're up to 30%. But you got to give holy day offerings, and everything else. People say, well, God deserves that. And your first tenth belongs to God. Listen, when they tithed under ancient Israel, that was their government. They had a government back there. And there were laws, and you had to hear and fear. But they didn't give 10% to the government, to the leaders, which were the priests, you see, and the Levites, and then another 20% to some other government. People don't tell you that today. That when you pay your taxes, that is the same as Israel paying their tithes. You don't then give a bunch of lying, two-faced, hypocritical, religious charlatans another 10% on the side. For what? To buy mansions and jets and wine and drugs. Unbelievable. It's time we wake up to some of these things. One day, it was a ministerial meeting in Pasadena, and somebody mentioned about third tithe, and that didn't they buy the jet, the French Falcon jet? Didn't they buy that using third tithe funds? That was supposed to go to widows and orphans and fathers and these people Denny were talking about. They couldn't have enough money to earn a living, feed the kids. And Gardner Ted said he was like puzzled. He's like, third tithe. And he looked at Al Portune. He said, he was the financial manager. Al Portune. He said, Al, did they use third tithe money to buy that jet? Like he didn't know. He bought himself a jet and he didn't know where the money came from. Give me a break. Now there's a man who said there's no sure way. I could tell you stories. I know a lot. There's a man who said there's no sure way to lose your salvation, end up in the lake of fire, and neglect your third tithe. And what is third tithe for? Buy him a damn jet. They would fly to San Francisco for dinner. He once flew to Colorado to pick up his skis or something. Herbert Armstrong once sent the Gulfstream to Tucson to deliver a letter. Overnight delivery wasn't good enough. You know what that cost to deliver that letter? Probably about $5,000 or $10,000. Back then, yeah. Unbelievable. I got one quotation I put in here from the True Believer. The effectiveness of a doctrine does not come from its meaning, but from its certitude. No doctrine, however profound and sublime, will be effective unless it is presented as the embodiment of the one and only truth. You know, we had the plain truth. Everything was true. We were the only true Church of God. All truth, the only one. There is nothing else. This is it. You deviate from the government of this church, you are lost. This is the one and only ultimate truth on the face of the earth. It must be the one word from which all things are and all things speak. Crude absurdities, trivial nonsense, and sublime truths are equally potent in readying people for self-sacrifice if they are accepted as the sole eternal truth. See that? Not only truths will be accepted, foolish nonsense will be accepted as truth if they think it is the truth. So since people think these people with this great authority and stuff are teaching the truth, they'll send them their money. You say, but I'm in debt. They'll tell you in a heartbeat. People who are in debt and don't have money to feed your kids, you are the ones above all else that should be sending us your money. Because you need a special blessing. Do you see the evil in this? You see why we have BibleTruths.com?
Reminds me of our cat food email.
Yeah. Let them eat cat food. Well, what about Armstrong's successor? Now the church is better, isn't it? Joe Tkach took the church over. And I'm going to quote one more time out of this book on the daughter of Babylon. So he's going to lift the burdens and everything else, you know. But he didn't have all these materialistic, vanity, egotistical nonsense in his head. Quote, Joe Tkach had the Armstrong mansion sealed after the passing of the baton, after Herbert died. The treasures acquired by the apostle then began to vanish. Armstrong had also maintained several $1 million in a Swiss bank account. Tkach was startled to find that no one in his staff could produce the account number for him. They knew it was there. They couldn't get their hands on it. Now he's the sole owner. I mean, the bylaws of the church, you know, documents. You know, he's the head of this thing. Desperately, he had a staff member phone a dissident ex-member who had once published the fact that he knew the number, offering him a substantial reward for the number. He refused to cooperate. Eventually, Tkach was able to gain access to the Swiss account by other means and share the spoil. End of quote. And of course, we kind of know what's happened now. I was told that, I don't know what it's sold for, but in this book or one other one, it's reported that Tkach Jr., then, the son who took over after his father Tkach died, put up the college for sale for $300 million. $300 million. And of course, that went to all the leadership, this government, all these authorities, you see, you know, got the spoils. They didn't give any of that back to the church. All right, now the question is there church government? Yes, matter of fact, there is. And I said this is probably the shortest subject in the Bible, okay? So let's turn to Ephesians 5. Kathy, I'm not blowing you away with this stuff, am I? You kind of suspected some of it, huh? Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22. Wives, submit yourself unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. So, do we have any government here? Any authority? Any rule? Yes. The husband is the head of the wife. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church. So, we got men, women, Christ, God. That's everybody. Okay? The angels. They're under authority too. Okay, so the man is the head of the wife. Christ is the head of the man in the church, men and women. And then if we go to 1 Corinthians 15:28, and Jesus Christ himself is subjected to God the Father. Okay? That's it. That's church government. That's it. Okay, now, let's start wrapping this up here. But, wait a minute, Ray. Let's not close so quickly here on that. Doesn't it say, and he gave some apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and some teachers? God ordained them? Is this not government in the church? Authority over the dumb sheep? Well, let's read the next sentence. What for? For what purpose? The Lord it over them? To steal their money? To make their lives miserable? No. For the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ. It doesn't say anything about authority, rule. Now, in Titus 1:5, Paul says, ordain elders in every city, he tells Timothy. What is the job of an elder? Well, let's read it. The elders which are among you I exhort, who am also an elder. So Paul was an elder, and he ordained elders in every church, every city. Why don't we do that? We don't have believers in every city, let alone elders. That's why. Somebody sent me an email on that. Aren't we supposed to still do that? Well, as soon as we get a city with some believers, maybe we'll ordain an elder. Anyway, the elders which are among you I exhort. I also am an elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also partaker of the glory that shall be revealed. Feed the flocks of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre. All of these are in the ministry only for filthy lucre. You say, no, it's filthy lucre and to spread the gospel. No, I tell you it's not. I care less about spreading the gospel. It's not all about the money. It's like I've said so often, it's not all about the money. It's only about the money. You've got to come to see that one day. It's only about the money. Not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. Now here it is. Neither as being lords over God's heritage, but being an example of their flock. What kind of example is it to use drugs and fornicate with geisha girls and live in multi-million-dollar mansions and have jets and drink hundreds of dollars bottles of champagne, and hoard to yourself treasures of gold and artwork? And what kind of an example is that? And then tell the people, some of you spending money to buy food when the church needs your money. Neither as being lords over God's heritage. Now that's what the Bible teaches about church government. What was Paul's attitude toward church government? Read it in 1 Corinthians 9. He says, have we not the power to lead about a sister or a wife and so on as the other apostles? Or I only and Barnabas, have we not the power to do the same? Or no, he says to forbear working. Paul worked for a living all the days of his life. He made tents and financed his own thing. He said, aren't we able to forbear working with our own hands? So we got to buy a sandwich? I mean, can't the church provide us with a meal for preaching the gospel? Certainly they can and should. Then he goes on to talk about the plowman and even you don't muzzle the ox who treads the corn. He gets to eat some of the corn, you know. Now he says, if we have sown to your spiritual needs, don't we have a right to reap some of your carnal? If we work all day teaching you, instructing you on how to live and how to be blessed of God and make it into the kingdom of God, don't we deserve to have a cup of soup for that? But he said, I wouldn't take any of it. He said, I wouldn't do it. You know? Why? Because these Corinthians, if you read in the first chapter, he said, you're yet carnal. You know? He said, I'll let somebody else buy me a sandwich, but not you. So yes, you have a right for what? Does the ox who treads the corn, does he have a right to jets and mansions and yachts and geisha girls? And no, the ox. Here's the teaching. The ox gets to eat, has a place to sleep. Shouldn't have to go out in a snowstorm to lay down. Should sleep in the barn, have food to eat, water to drink. That's the analogy. And certainly anybody who's a minister should be able to have just a few benefits, you know, like that. But with the Corinthians, at least, Paul accepted gifts from others, but not from them. You can read that whole thing if you want. Now back to this original. But we just read about obeying those that have the rule over you. Well, let's take another look at those verses. 1491 is the number for Strong's rule. And it also means to maintain, to stand before, or to preside. Just the one that stands before you, the one that teaches you, the one that presides, and so on. Now let's notice some better translations of this in Hebrew 13:7. Concordance says, be remembering those of your leaders who speak to you the Word of God. I don't see rule over you, control your pocketbook. You know, I don't see that in that verse, do you? Rather, be mindful of them who are guiding you. There's a big difference. You notice how this other minister, I don't know which Bible he found it, obey your leaders and submit to them. See? How come these other translations didn't quite see it that way? Be mindful of them who are guiding you. Youngs, be mindful of those leading you. Then we have verse 17. I don't have it on there. I just have Hebrews 13. Concordance says, be persuaded by your leaders and be deferring to them, for they are vigilant for your sake, and so on. Just saying, show respect, you know, listen to, show respect. They don't rule over you. They don't have authority over you. Be yielding unto them who are guiding you, and so on. Hebrews 13:24. Greet all your leaders and all the saints. But in the King James, it had to have the rule over you, you see. Rotherham. Salute all those who are guiding you. Big difference between, you know, rule, authority, government. Just salute them. Youngs also. Salute all those leading you, as of all the saints. Now I'm going to give you all the scriptures in the entire New Testament on authority. And we'll see how much authority the church has over anybody. Luke 1:9. Then he called these 12 disciples together and gave them authority over the devils. Is God congregation of the devils? No. Luke 19:17. And he said unto them, well done, you good and faithful servant. You were faithful over very little. Have you authority over 10 cities? That's in the kingdom of God. Over the unbelievers, not in the church. 1 Timothy 2:12. But I suffer not women to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man. Woman is not to have authority over her own husband. Okay? But what about all the scriptures that speak about the clergy having authority over the congregation? There are no such scriptures. There are no such scriptures. Now here's what Jesus did say, though. Now here it is in a nutshell. Yet these ministers, they think these other scriptures all contradict this. No, they don't. But Jesus called them unto him, his disciples, and he said, You know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they have great exercising of authority upon them. But it shall not be so among you. There it is. What authority do you, apostles of mine, have over the people to exercise authority and dominion and rule and fear and intimidate them for all their money? What authority? None. The Gentiles rulers, they do that. But not the apostles. And that's found in all the synoptic gospels. But it shall not be so among you. You know, lots of things are only mentioned in John, or only mentioned in Luke, or only mentioned in Matthew, or maybe in 2. This is mentioned in 3, the synoptic gospels, all 3 of them. I would say that's pretty important when they include it in all 3, you know. Just like the parables. Some of them are only included, you'll find it in Mark, you find it in Matthew. Some of you find it in Matthew, and a few of them you find in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. That's an important one, you see. So I received an email recently. I haven't even answered it yet. The man says, you know, I'm looking at your stuff here, but what I want to know is, what authority do you submit to? Who are your teachers that you are under? You know, what government are you subject to in your teaching of these things? Somebody thinks I'm under some man? Under some church government? Alright, let me read 2 final verses in closing. Galatians 2:6. But of the... Now here's the Apostle Paul. Now understand, the Apostle Paul is the junior apostle. There were the 12. Judas fell away. Matthias was brought in on the day of Pentecost, right? There's the 12 again. And later, after all the persecution, then we have Stephen being martyred. And they throw his clothes down at one Saul, Pharisee, who later turned into Paul. So Paul is a later comer, a later bloomer of the apostles. He was a junior apostle. But here's the authority that Paul was under in this church hierarchy, where Peter was given the key, all that, Here it is. But of these who seem to be somewhat, in authority, somewhat important, whatsoever they were, it makes no matter to me. See? When he went up to Jerusalem in Acts 15, to converse with the church and the elders and the apostles and everybody concerning this thing of circumcision, keeping the law, certainly he was respectful of who they were and everything else, but he didn't go up there to kowtow or anything under them. Those that seem to be somewhat, it makes no difference to me. God accepts no man's person. For they who seem to be somewhat in conference added nothing to me. We say, well, he's a little huffy there, isn't he? No, he's just speaking the truth. Just speaking the truth. Paul went through more than a lot of the apostles. I mean, they were all persecuted and so on, but I don't think, Paul had to go through a lot. Christ said, you're going to have to suffer a lot for my name. You've been a bad boy. You've been really bad. You're going to have to suffer a lot. So, nobody was going to teach Paul something, not even the apostles. They weren't going to add to his spiritual understanding of who Jesus Christ was, other than, they just might tell him things that he taught them that Paul had not heard. But as far as teaching Paul how to be a better Christian, He was not going to have any of that. And in 1 Corinthians 9:19, he says, "For though I be free from all men, yet have I made myself a servant unto all, that I might gain the more." There it is. There's church government, okay? We had 12 original apostles, yet Paul said, For though I be free from all men, there's nobody over him. And he said, nobody's over you. And Peter said, there are deacons and there are elders, and here's what they're there for. They're there to help you and to build you up and to be an example for you, and not to lord it over you. We just read that, didn't we? And yet look what we see in this charade of religiosity. It's just despicable and despicable. So, I be free from all men, yet he made himself a servant. Christ said, you want to be the greatest in the kingdom of God, you make yourself a servant. He said, I came. He said, I'm your Lord. But he said, I didn't come to be served. I came to serve. Right? So, boy, I tell you, that's church government. All you need is about 2-3 scriptures. That's the whole subject of church government. This church government, is presented by all these churches. It's a total farce. It's a total farce. It's Babylon. Babylon. Money, power, Babylon. Okay.